Geronimo's life is an epic shaped by defiance, endurance, and a complex relationship with the land he called homeborn Goyolo in 1829, meaning the one who yells. He was part of the Badonko band of the Apache tribe. While the name might imply simplicity or tranquility, Geronimo's life would come to be anything but restful. He emerged in a time of violent change, where the mountains and deserts of the American Southwest were stained with the blood of conflict. It was an era defined by a collision of cultures: Native American tribes, Mexican forces, and eventually the relentless wave of American settlers and soldiers. From the earliest days, Geronimo's upbringing instilled in him the skills and values that would define his role as a warrior and leader. The Apache were masters of their harsh environment, teaching their young to survive in a world that offered little respite. They were skilled hunters, strategic fighters, and deeply spiritual, people who viewed nature as an ally rather than an enemy. For Geronimo, the lessons of his youth were fundamental. He learned to hunt the swift deer, track enemies across seemingly barren terrain, and listen to the whisper of the wind for signs of danger. These lessons would later underpin his legendary ability to elude capture and wage relentless guerrilla warfare. Geronimo's fate took a tragic turn in 1858 when he was 29 years old. While trading in the town of Casquia, in present-day Llanos, Chihuahua, Mexico, he and most of the men were away from their camp. Suddenly, Mexican soldiers, under the command of Colonel Jose Maria Carrasco, attacked the unguarded Apache encampment. The scene Geronimo returned to was one of unimaginable horror. His mother, wife, and 3 children lay among the dead. The massacre, a particularly brutal act, even by the brutal standards of frontier conflict, ignited a fire in him that would never be quenched. This devastating loss turned Geronimo from a warrior into an avenger. His thirst for retribution was boundless, rooted in personal grief and a collective sense of injustice. Geronimo's role as a spiritual leader among the Apache began to grow, not just because of his fighting skills, but because of the spiritual force he embodied. He claimed to receive visions and guidance from the Apache deity who, he said, protected him in battle and warned him of danger. Whether real or the product of deep conviction, these visions fortified his legend. The Apache believed in the power of dreams and omens, and for Geronimo, these beliefs were a source of personal empowerment and a rallying cry for those who followed him. The cycle of violence between the Apache and Mexican forces had roots that stretched back to the Spanish colonization of the Americas. For centuries, the Apache raided settlements for supplies, food, and horses, essential for their way of life. These raids were not purely acts of aggression, but were often responses to encroachments on their territory and attacks on their people. However, after the death of his family, Geronimo's raids against Mexican forces took on a deeply personal nature. He became known not just for leading attacks, but for his ruthless efficiency and unyielding ferocity. Accounts of these raids have passed into the realm of legend. On one such occasion, during a nighttime raid on a Mexican village, Geronimo's warriors moved like shadows through the streets, striking quickly and retreating just as swiftly. They took supplies and inflicted casualty, before disappearing into the rugged landscape, leaving no trace for pursuing forces. The Mexicans, in response, dubbed him Geronimo, possibly derived from their cries to Saint Jerome as they faced his terrifying onslaughts. Whether or not this etymology is accurate, the name stuck, and it would become synonymous with resistance. The resilience and cunning that Geronimo displayed were not just the product of raw courage, but of a deep understanding of guerrilla warfare. The Apache's knowledge of the terrain allowed them to outmaneuver their enemies repeatedly. They knew where to find water in the desert, how to move silently over the sand, and when to strike for maximum effect. Geronimo's leadership and strategic brilliance elevated these raids beyond simple skirmishes. They became part of a sustained campaign of defiance. Yet life as a fugitive exacted a toll, not just on Geronimo but on the entire Apache community. Women, children, and elders endured long marches, scarce food, and the constant threat of discovery. It was a nomadic existence, defined by its precarity. Despite this, Geronimo maintained the loyalty of his followers, driven by the same spirit of survival and defiance. He often spoke of freedom as an intrinsic right, something worth every hardship. To the Apache, surrender was not just defeat, It was the loss of identity, a fate worse than death by the mid-19th century, however. The landscape of conflict began to change. The Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, shifted control of the Southwest to the United States, adding a new layer of tension. Government driven by manifest destiny, saw the native tribes as obstacles to be removed or subdued. The Apache found themselves facing an enemy with seemingly endless resources and an insatiable appetite for expansion. Unlike the scattered and often poorly organized Mexican troops, the U.S. military brought a level of coordination and persistence that tested even Geronimo's unmatched skill. The 1870s were a period of continuous pressure for the Apache. Various leaders, including Cochise and Mangus Colorados, sought treaties and peace agreements, understanding that the long-term survival of their people might require compromise. However, peace was elusive. The promises made by government officials were often broken, as settlers continued to encroach on Apache lands and resources. The cycle of betrayal reinforced Geronimo's belief that trust was a commodity too costly to afford. One of the most striking betrayals came when Mangus Colorados was captured during what was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. He was tortured and killed while in custody, his body desecrated to send a message. For Geronimo and his followers, this was a stark reminder that peace talks could be more dangerous than battle. It also underscored the willingness of their enemies to employ any tactic, no matter how dishonorable. To achieve victory in 1876, the U.S. government forced the Apache onto the San Carlos Reservation, an arid, desolate expanse in Arizona known as Hell's 40 Acres. It was a place where crops withered and disease ran rampant. The confinement was an affront to everything. The Apache valued freedom, autonomy, and the open land. For Geronimo, life on the reservation was intolerable. He escaped multiple times, each time leading a band of warriors and their families into the wilderness where they resumed their fight. These escapes were acts of defiance, but they also took a heavy toll. On one occasion in the mid-1880s, Geronimo led a group that included women and children through the treacherous Sierra Madre Mountains to avoid capture. The journey was perilous, with the constant threat of starvation and attack from rival tribes or pursuing soldiers. Geronimo's leadership in these moments showed not only his tactical brilliance, but his deep commitment to those who depended on him. One of the most daring escapes occurred in 1883. General George Crook, known for his mixed approach of diplomacy and force, had cornered Geronimo's band. Just when it seemed capture was inevitable, Geronimo and his warriors slipped through the narrowest of mountain passes under the cover of night, leaving their pursuers bewildered. This kind of escape solidified Geronimo's mythic status. Soldiers believed him to be capable of supernatural feats. How else could he vanish from what seemed like an inescapable trap? The final chapter of Geronimo's war against the United States began in 1885. Frustrated by the conditions on the reservation and wary of constant military oversight, he led a breakout with a small band of warriors and their families, numbering fewer than 150 people. What followed was one of the most dramatic pursuits in the history of the American West. For over a year, Geronimo's group evaded capture, covering vast distances across Arizona, New Mexico, and into Mexico, with US and Mexican forces in relentless pursuit. Despite the small size of his band, Geronimo orchestrated skirmishes that held entire military units at bay. His ability to elude capture infuriated generals and captivated the public. To many Americans, he was both a villain and a hero, a symbol of a vanishing way of life, and an embodiment of the fierce independence that many settlers ironically admired in themselves. The campaign came to an end in 1886 when Geronimo, exhausted and recognizing the inevitable, agreed to surrender to General Nelson A. Miles. This final surrender marked the last major Native American resistance to US military power. In his surrender speech, Geronimo is said to have declared, "Once I moved about like the wind. Now I surrender to you, and that is all." This moment was as much a recognition of defeat as it was a testament to the relentlessness with which he had fought for his people's freedom. After his surrender, Geronimo and his followers were sent to Fort Pickens in Florida and later to Fort Sill in Oklahoma. Life in captivity was harsh. Many died from disease, unable to adapt to the unfamiliar climate and conditions. Yet Geronimo adapted in unexpected ways. He took up farming and even converted to Christianity, though he later stated that his heart was never truly in it. He became a celebrity, participating in fairs and exhibitions, including the 1904 St. Deta Louis World Fair, where he was exhibited as the savage who had defied America. He even rode in President Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade in 1905, a living relic of the fierce, independent spirit that the nation romanticized but had systematically crushed. Geronimo's later years were marked by a strange paradox. He was both a prisoner and a symbol of resilience. He dictated his autobiography, Geronimo's Story of His Life, in 1905, offering a narrative that was part defiance, part resignation. He reflected on the betrayals, the battles, and the unyielding love for his homeland. While some have criticized the work as being filtered through the biases of the era and his amanuensis, it remains a crucial document that offers a glimpse into his perspective. In February 1909, after attending a gathering, Geronimo fell from his horse and spent a night exposed to the cold. He developed pneumonia, and days later, on his deathbed, he spoke to his nephew, expressing regret. "I should never have surrendered. I should have fought until I was the last man alive." These words, more than any other, encapsulated his spirit, a man who, despite defeat, never surrendered, his belief in the righteousness of his cause. Geronimo's legacy is complex. To the Apache, he remains a symbol of resistance, a leader who embodied their unyielding will. To the United States, he is remembered as both a fearsome opponent and a fascinating, if tragic, figure. His name has become synonymous with bravery, invoked as a battle cry, and immortalized in popular culture. Yet beyond the myths lies the story of a man who navigated the harsh realities of his time with courage, skill, and an unwavering commitment to his people. His story serves as a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and facts, but a tapestry of lives lived in defiance of fate. Geronimo's tale is not simply one of battle and resistance. It is a meditation on the cost of freedom, the nature of leadership, and the relentless march of progress that leaves both victors and vanquished in its wake. What are your reflections on Geronimo's journey? Does his legacy stir admiration, empathy, or sorrow? Share your thoughts and join the conversation about the figures who shaped, resisted, and bore witness to the forging of the American frontier.